we decided that we would get in front of the leading minds and thinkers in the world. The icing on the cake was the chance to meet Stephen Hawking. I think for Bill, it was one of the most moving experiences of his life.
I remember seeing that segment.
We called the film The Truth is in the Stars. And the premise of that documentary was to transport the viewer into the era of Star Trek, 250 years from now, when it was set, and imagine how we might be looking back on the time we're living right now.
My name is William Shatner, and this is a voyage to probe the most brilliant and creative minds on the planet, to find out if the truth is in the stars.
So in order to tell that story, we decided that we would get Bill in front of the leading minds and thinkers in the world of the day. We ended up with fewer than we'd agreed to. We had a lot of people who had said yes, and we couldn't fit them into the film. But we ended up interviewing Whoopi Goldberg, who was in Star Trek The Next Generation, who was inspired by Nichelle Nichols in that role. We interviewed Seth MacFarlane, who created Family Guy, but Seth MacFarlane is also the producer of Cosmos, the series on PBS, or it's on National Geographic now.
And he was a huge Star Trek fan.
Huge Star Trek science fiction fan.
Yeah.
We interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson from the Hayden Observatory in New York. Jason Alexander from Seinfeld, who had also started on Star Trek, worked on Star Trek in a number of episodes. Who else? Chris Hadfield, the astronaut, who Bill had spoken to when Chris was up at the space station. David Suzuki, talking about the environmental aspect. But the icing on the cake was the chance to meet Stephen Hawking. And that was the almost never happened. It was not on. It was on.
Talking about, it's one of his last interviews, I believe.
One of his last interviews. He died like 6 months later.
Yeah.
But it was a really...
What was that like?
It was a delicate negotiation because, first of all, Stephen Hawking doesn't do interviews. You have to submit the questions in advance.
Because he has to prepare the answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I worked my tail off to convince them to do this. And then they said no at first. And I said, okay, I'm in Canada. Can I come to England next weekend to sit down and explain this film to you? And they said, if you're willing to come to England, you can come and meet Stephen and meet us. So I flew to England
This was before the filming.
Yeah, this is like in 2016, I think, or earlier. Yeah, it was in July, I believe, July of 2016. So I flew over to Heathrow, rented a car, went up to Cambridge, met his team at Cambridge University and his office, and I said, it was a typical university professor's office. It wasn't big enough, and it wasn't that exciting. And I said, really, this is Bill meeting Stephen for the first time. Can we please go to his house? And so they talked to Stephen, and Stephen said, yes, send him over. So I went over for lunch to Stephen Hawking's house, which was just across campus.
Why do you think he finally said yes to this?
Because I had a chance to sit down with him face to face, and it was like a monologue because he can't answer. He can answer, pleasantries and saying thank you so much.
The voice recorder.
Best of luck with the project was what he said to me. So I sat there. His assistants were there too. So I was talking to two or three of them as we were having lunch at a table no bigger than this in his house. And I told him why I wanted to make the film and why Bill wanted to meet him. The good thing was Stephen Hawking was a huge Star Trek fan.
Yes.
And Stephen Hawking had actually been on an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, playing a poker game with Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein.
Wow.
Wrong again, Albert.
And also, Hawking had been in the Vomit Comet, the plane where astronauts train.
Yes.
And he'd never met William Shatner and admired him and agreed to be interviewed. So what happened was we had to develop the list of questions, which I sent over like a month in advance, 6 weeks in advance. We only could ask 8 questions because of the time involved for him to do the answers. So we really had a tough time coming up with the questions. We ended up sending over more questions. And we get there. We fly over with Bill a few weeks later. And we take Bill around Cambridge University and do a beautiful thing. And then we go to the house. And we were told we'd get an hour with Stephen Hawking. Well, it ended up being 4 hours.
Wow.
Because unbeknownst to us, Stephen Hawking had prepared questions for Bill. So after Bill had asked all his questions, Stephen started asking questions of Bill. And it got into this, it went on and on and on.
Yeah.
And at the end, as we were wrapping up, Stephen had a real sense of humor. And as they were saying goodbye on camera, Stephen said, "Bill, would you like to stay for dinner?"
I would love to stay for dinner.
So Bill, I'd love to. So Bill actually stayed for dinner. I was invited to go along as well, but I chose not to. I thought it was better for Bill just to go there.
Yeah.
But Bill was really nervous because there was this interaction that was prepared for the interview.
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Craig, what am I gonna do?"
Because at this point, Stephen Hawking couldn't speak, I believe.
Couldn't speak. It was all computerized.
Yeah.
And I said to Bill was doing this one-man show at the time. I said, "Bill, just pretend it's your one-man show to an audience of one.
Yeah.
And just talk."
Yeah.
And
that's what happened?
That's what happened. And so the next morning I said to Bill, "How'd it go?" He said, I talked for 3 hours straight talking to this guy, and we had lamb stew, and it was just wonderful. And I think for Bill, it was one of the most moving experiences of his life.
I remember seeing that segment, not the dinner, but and he was so taken with Stephen Hawking's presence.
Yeah. But we all were. Like, of all the people I've ever met in my career, having a chance to spend not 1 day but 2 days with Stephen Hawking one-on-one was like incredible.
Yeah.
And it was just
I can imagine.
it was wonderful.